so this is wonderful to be back together with everybody again on the eve of the session. I think as we look forward to the 2024 legislative session, I'm looking at it as a session that is just opportunities. I think it's a unique point in Oregon's history, again, where Democrats and Republicans are united when it comes to the big issues facing our state. Housing and homelessness being the #1 issue facing our community crisis. And number 3, how do we invest in a better future for all moving down the road? When it comes to housing and homelessness, we're going to be focused on making sure that we have the immediate supports to get people off the streets into housing. We're going to be focused on keeping people in housing, and then also how do you build more housing in the state. When it comes to our addiction crisis that is impacting every community, rural Oregonians as well as people in Portland, we are really working, making sure that we have a comprehensive plan that address this issue urgently, and that includes things like making sure that people have the right supports at the right time so that they can move the path to recovery. Additionally, we need to make sure that law enforcement has they need to be able to combat hard drugs like methamphetamine. That is going to be another big priority moving through the session. And finally, we need to invest in have a brighter future. Look at our last session, we spent an inordinate amount of time focusing on the semiconductor industry. It created one of the best jobs reports we've seen in this state. We need to continue to do that. It's going to be a $50 million that needs to be released. So we can continue that momentum, provide more federal dollars in the state. There's also a lot of other proposals on how to invigorate downtown Portland, which is an economic for our entire state, as well as other rural infrastructure packages across as we look going. Now, I say all of that with the realization that this is a 35-day session. That's a lot to do in that time. We have very fortunate that we have greatly over the last decade. We are in a good position to have the resources to be able to tackle these issues. That's the first thing you have. The second thing is because it is a 35-day session, you also have to have done the work to get into session. That, if you think about our addiction crisis committee, that is something that was set up several months ago. We start engaging communities, recovery community, whether it is our law enforcement organizations, to really start working to address those issues. We have legislators, Democrats, we're addressing issues so that we can be set up and ready for the upcoming session. So we're very fortunate to be in a spot to have the resources, but then at the same time, have the process and infrastructure set up to be able to do things in a very short session. Finally, we have to do all of this while continuing to build a culture of respect. I'm very proud of the work that House has done over the last 2 sessions to be able to govern responsive in a way that is respectful to each other, with a common understanding that it doesn't matter the values when it comes to the big issues facing our community. Very difficult issues with respect. And I have like an immense amount of respect. We have a leadership transition. Obviously, this is Helfrich's first session. We've spent a lot of time together. We obviously had a pre-existing relationship with Fahey, so we've been spending a lot of time taking a no surprises approach to the session. On building relationships, knowing that there's going to be some issues that we're not going to agree on, but that we're there and committed to the of where we want to bring it up. Whether that's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. Very fortunate to have a partner, Fahey and Helfrich in that spot. And so I will just kind of leave it with there and turn it. Yeah, Mr. Speaker. Okay. All right. Is this loud enough for you guys? Okay. So I thank you, Speaker Rayfield, for that eloquent session is going to be. But I really want to emphasize that the Speaker and I have a really good relationship, and we talk about no surprises. We both understand that there are different pathways to get to the same goal. So we're going to have disagreements. I talked about this when I was Vice Chair of Housing and Homelessness. The family, it's an extended family. We're going to have arguments, but at the end of the day, what are we going to do? Succeed or fail in the moment. I want to succeed in this moment because we are facing a crisis with Measure 110, the addiction crisis, the crime that has been part of that. We're also facing housing and homelessness.
Housing issue, we had an opportunity for a housing production bill last session. However, that failed by one vote. The governor had convened the House, the HPAC committee to get all the stakeholders together to come together with a bill for that. We are committed to getting production up. We have to, but it has to be conversations when it comes to land use. And those are one of those conversations, I think, for both sides of the aisle, that's going to be a very difficult one. We do have a very unique land use system that's worked for many years. And so we have to have the internal fortitude to make those tough decisions. And that may be unpopular with some people, but by having this open communication that Speaker Rayfield talked about, and I've talked with Peter Fahey, I think we can get there. 110, I think, is the biggest crisis that we're facing. We have more people dying on the street. We have people in their drug markets. We need to get to a solution. We talked about the task force that's there. We're not there. We have a starting point. We had a bill that we presented. They have their framework. Somewhere in the middle, we'll get there, but we have to have accountability through the criminal justice system. But we also have to have that compassionate care. I believe those are the two things that are going to drive the conversation for Measure 110. Early and often intervention, I think, is the key to the success of Measure 110 and what that looks like. And then we're going to talk about general fund budgets. Are we being good stewards of the public dollars? I believe we have been. There's going to be some budget asks, and we're going to have those difficult conversations about what is going to get funded, what's not going to be. How does that help move us in the right direction for whether it's housing production or drug treatment facilities? What is treatment facilities? What does that look like? Those are questions that we still have unanswered to, but we have ideas with that. And then the last part, we want to be business friendly. And I don't think we've done a good job with that in Oregon. We have what came out of the CHIPS Act and the dollars that are being spent with that. I sat on the dais every time and said, we can bring all the jobs we want, but people can afford to live here because the cost of living is too much. We have to have those cost drivers down. And the largest cost of living for people in the state is purchasing a home. I live in Hood River, has the highest home buyer rate that you're ever going to see. It starter homes around $700,000 just to get into a house. And that's not attainable. So we have to look at those solutions to how we can get the housing costs down. I think there's a pathway there, but it's going to take a lot of that.
Thank you, Helfrich. Good morning, everyone. So this morning, House Democrats officially released our agenda for the short session. As Speaker Rayfield and Leader Helfrich said, no surprise that the big issues that we plan to take on are housing and homelessness and our addiction crisis. So the agenda we released is our plan to help make our communities cleaner, safer, and healthier. But as the speaker said, the short session is only 35 days. So we've done a lot of work to get us to this point, to be prepared for the session to start next week. So I want to talk about a few of the specifics about some of the things we work on housing, supply, homelessness, and the addiction. On housing supply, I think we are very lucky that we've got two people up at this table that are deeply, have been deeply involved in the conversation about housing supply for the last year. Peter Helfrich is the vice chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee, and he is the past chair of that committee. And we see eye to eye on a lot of things. So I feel like that's a good start and a good foundation for us heading into the session. The way that I see it over the last few years, the Oregon legislature has sort of steadily been knocking down barriers to housing supply. Starting in 2017 when we passed the bill allowing accessory dwelling units, and then 2019, this first state in the nation to do statewide zoning reform, and on from there. This session, there are 4 key barriers that we're going to talk about. The first is local infrastructure. So we know that there are many cities throughout the state where there's land within the urban growth boundary that is available for residential development, but that is not able to be developed because the cities lack the funding to develop water and wastewater infrastructure, including my own city in Eugene. So we're going to take a big swing at helping local governments fund that infrastructure that will support our housing business. The second is land supply, which Leader Helfrich referenced. There are also some cities in our state that do not have enough land to meet their housing needs. And so the governor is bringing back her bill to help provide some extra flexibility in the land use for one-time UGB. The third is regulatory barriers. So the governor is also bringing back her bill about design standards and limiting the types of design standards that cities can impose. So this is things like not being able to deny housing because the facade is the wrong color or the window. And then finally, financing and funding. We have made significant investments in the last few years in affordable housing development for low-income Oregonians. And this session will be considering a proposal that creates an innovative financing method for middle income workers. So using a revolving loan fund to help finance development of middle class workers. On homelessness, we've had great success in recent years with creating and standing up new shelter beds and navigation centers. We had Project Turnkey, which was a huge success. And we met the governor's goals in the last year for creating new shelter beds. Now we have to make sure that those new facilities can stay up and running. Make some investments this session to make sure. And we'll continue some of the work on the prevention. On behavioral health and the addiction crisis, we all know that we need more access to treatment facilities and a more streamlined and coordinated system of care in Oregon. And for that to happen, we need more facilities and we need a bigger workforce. So on workforce, we'll be considering what I think is a very interesting program, using the apprenticeship model to build the behavioral health workforce. And of course, we'll be focused on investments in shovel-ready facilities. And we also know that we need a better way to connect people to treatment. So the hotline in Measure 110 clearly isn't working as a way to connect people to treatment. And so we're going to consider other ways where law enforcement could play a role in that connection. And then the whole list of policies that the committee co-chairs proposed last week around increasing access to medication-based treatment, increasing the temporary hold from 48 hours to 72 hours. There's a long list of policies in a pretty sweeping package. So those are the big issues. We know there are other things we're going to need to focus on, rebalancing the budget, other issues that will come up that our members bring. But we're really focused on getting the work done and solving the big challenges that we're facing in our.
Let's open it up for questions. Peter, go ahead.
This question for the two leaders. Sorry, Speaker Rayfield, but it piggybacks on your housing experience since Representative Fahey chaired the committee and Representative Helfrich was the top Republican last session. Do you see any significant disagreements in what the governor has outlined? And if so, what adjustments do you think the legislature has to make, either in terms of the money package or the policies that you just outlined?
I think I'll take a shot at the first part. The governor has a very robust ask for the infrastructure. And as we sit in Ways and Means and look at actually how many dollars are there and saving for the future, those asks are going to have to be pared down, but you have to have the infrastructure available for the cities to use, then to have to kickstart the production. So there's going to be a balance with dollars going out.
And just to add to that, I would say on the financing side, we're all waiting for the revenue forecast on February 7th. What resources we have available to balance the budget. And of course, we are required to balance. So that is a constraint on how much we're housing front. Knowing that we also need to make investments in places. On the policy front, the governor has done a lot of good work in her team for the last few months, refining the policy that was proposed in the long session last year on both the UGB expansion side and on the variance side, the adjustment side for design. I think we are, in all cases, no matter what the issue are, that work was leading up to the session is very important. And next week, we start the public input process and we start the process of refining those proposals to the legislative. So I am interested to see how that goes. From my point of view, the perspective about the UGP expansion is about balancing the very real benefits of our land use system that prevent sprawl, that preserve our valuable farm and forest land, with the fact that we do need land for housing. And our land use system requires us to plan for needed housing, to make sure that there's adequate housing for. So that balance, I think we're striking that balance with the policy, and I'm looking for the conversation. And that bill will start on the Senate side.
Quick follow-up. Is there anything that's going to happen with the proposal, or at least the idea that floated by Representatives Gomberg and McIntyre during the last legislative days about financing for public works cities related to housing?
I think talking about process will be helpful about how these decisions are made in the we running a similar process to what we ran in the session. Chairs of the policy committee conversation, and they have been leading several months. That also incorporates the vice chair of the committee, both in the Senate and House. So it's a cross-chamber conversation. On top of that, we have sub-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, which would represent in that conversation. There will be an infrastructure component of the housing package that will focus on getting units produced in the short term. I think you've heard talk about the long term increased supply for the state of Oregon. And so there will be components of that package included. I will say when we asked folks for shovel-ready infrastructure, shovel projects, this came in at more than and obviously it would not be responsible at the present time to spend dollars on shovel-ready projects, given we're in the middle of a cycle and we haven't even had the revenue forecast that's to do that. And so we're in the process of allowing those individuals to create a draft plan, wait for the revenue forecast, and then we'll make a final decision.
Thank you.
What are some issues, this is for all three, what are some issues that you know you won't get to this session legally or still on the state better?
I would start off and say that, and just again, remind people, it's a 35-day session, right? So it's a really good question. We're going to make significant steps when it comes to housing and homelessness. We'll take significant steps in the behavioral health addiction crisis in the state. That conversation has to continue. We set up a joint committee with the vision that that committee will continue in the end, where that work will go on and into 2025. So I don't see those issues going away. That needs to be front and center as the legislative leadership moves forward in that direction. One of the other massive issues facing the state is transportation. It's not something that you knock on doors as a politician during an election cycle and people are really excited about, but it is critical infrastructure in the state that's important. Resilience, it's important economy, and there's a huge lead up in laying that groundwork for the upcoming 25 session. And so that's something that the entire legislature, the executive branch is focused on session, and I know both.
Just echo Speaker Rayfield. Had a conversation with the governor yesterday about transportation. Had numerous conversations in our leadership huddles or meetings that we've had, and it is going to be a big ask. And I don't think people really understand the magnitude of what is going to be needed for funding for ODOT for the projects. We're talking about tolling, which is a very hot button topic, and we have to have a very robust conversation because we're out of balance for the late mile tax that heavy trucks are paying versus what users of gasoline users of the Highway Trust Fund. Then also compounded that with pushing electric vehicles, which I have one, that not paying a fair share in the weight mile, or weight to travel, miles traveled. And so we have to have those very tough conversations about what that package looks like, starting it now with the vice chair, Representative Bosshart Davis, Chair McLean, and trying to figure out what that looks like. So we have a blue, because I think that's probably the most pressing issue moving forward. Is transportation.
And I would just echo that on transportation as well. We have to make sure that ODOT has the funding they need in our roads, and there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the run up to the 20 session to make that, to come up with our proposal. One thing I would add is the Housing Production Advisory Council. So they issued a set of recommendations a few weeks ago. They worked for months to develop them. I think these are the folks that are doing the work of building our housing on the ground, and they have good ideas about how we can build more and build more faster. And some of those ideas have not been fully worked or fully vetted. So they're not ready for the legislature to. So I expect there will be a fair amount of work this year in taking some of those ideas, leaving some of them behind, and figuring out how we move forward on those ideas in the 25.
I didn't hear you mention education.
It's funny you say that. I was thinking education in my head. That is, I'm very excited. The governor put together a task force or some of these really significant issues, and I think that is what is really into the 20 session. I think it's an interesting place for the legislature to be because in 2019, we passed a historic Student Success Act that put more than $2 billion in our school. Legislators, we were like ecstatic about that. That was a monumental thing. We run for office to, and talk about education. It is a big pillar of the way we see the vision of the state. I have a 12-year-old. I was on with my school this morning, or his school, I should say. This last session, we had the schools come in and ask for a specific dollar figure. Funded that this last session, and we were ecstatic to be able to meet the ask of the schools and all the advocates. Even so, after doing that, we still see outcome challenges, right, for our students. Even in those spaces, we see what happened in Portland, right, where they're saying, hey, we need more resources. Which for some of us who were very excited after those past few monumental accomplishments, it was, there's a little bit of a sense of defeat behind that, and that's where I think the governor starting this conversation resets that table to how can we start having that conversation of outcomes as well as what is the right level of appropriate funding. We have infrastructure challenges across the state. I mean, we have Portland schools that are closed down right now because of some of these infrastructure challenges. And I'm getting emails from parents. It's very challenging, that dynamic between the state level and the local. How do we all collaborate together? Because again, I think whether you're a parent or just someone living in the outcomes and the effectiveness, making sure that our students and teachers have the resources they need is a real challenge. And so I think that is going to be an incredible build-up towards the 25th session. I think.
Just to add on what Leader Fahey said, I was part of the HPAC Housing Production Advisory Council for the government. And the very first meeting they had was somebody said, "Is this just a meeting? Is this just a group to have a group conversation?" And it was absolutely not. The recommendations that are coming out of that group are going to be implemented or at least looked at and talked about within the legislative body, because you've had stakeholders from every corner of the state working towards a solution, getting more housing there. And I think that's a long-term talking about. But just really emphasize that. I believe that work. That's a good framework for all the stakeholders together, actually have a conversation with legislators in the room, and over not just a 5-day period, a 6-month period, long session, but a summer in the interim. It's very beneficial to see what they need.
So I have 2 questions I'm going to try to throw at you, and then I'll just shut up.
Why do you always do this, Dirk? You get one
I know.
question. You need to shut this down.
So the governor has said she doesn't want to, I think she would advocate potentially not putting money in the rainy day fund and because she obviously has a very big ask that maybe you guys aren't going to want. Is that something you might be amenable to, depending on what the February 7th forecast shows? The second is, I do have a question about the leadership change. It's a very interesting way the speaker vote might take place. My sense is that maybe some Republicans have heartburn. I haven't been able to really get a read on how you all feel, Leader Helfrich, but if the Democrats do make the decision they want to vote for a speaker and he steps down at the end of session, is that something that your caucus is open to and would sort of participate in?
So you have a real question, then you want to get into palace intrigue? Is what you
Both
want to
seem
do?
important.
Which question do you want to answer first? Because you're looking at me for the last one.
Yeah, maybe first the budget thing, because that seems like a fairly simple question.
I think you pointed it out exactly. The revenue forecast is very critical. We're fortunate right now where I think we've set up with the resources to be able to make meaningful impacts on housing and homelessness, as well as the addiction crisis without having to dig into reserves. Let's see what happens, and we're going to reassess everything next week once we get a revenue forecast and kind of like try and finalize those things. We also have to have a conversation in the legislature about all of these. So it's a little bit early from a legislative sense to be talking about the rainy day fund. Are those on the table? Absolutely, everything's on the table in that sense. Primarily because these issues are so huge and are another year. We need to make sure that when it comes to housing and homelessness, we walk out of this session people feeling like they had the resources to be able to tackle those issues, both in housing homelessness space, but then also in the addiction crisis space.
So talk a little bit about the budget side of that, those asks. I believe we have a rainy day fund for dollars in there. Big Rayfield and I have had those conversations, what that looks like. It's always nice to have a wish list and ask. We don't always get what we want in our Christmas tree. So we're going to work towards those, but I believe we have to save in the next biennium because we don't know what that outlook's going to look like. To save the dollars that we have. Your second question about the speaker vote, Speaker Rayfield and I have had very robust conversations about it. It's a chamber decision. It's not just what a Democratic caucus decision or Republican caucus decision. The vote happens on the floor. We have a speaker right now, and that speaker we voted on last session. We'd like to see him complete his term. If that happens or not, or however the dynamics works through session on that is left to be seen, but there is an opportunity. If he steps down after short session, we have a speaker pro temp holding, who can run that, and then elections have consequences, and then let's vote in 2025 is my portion.
So sorry.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think all three of us up here right now know that we have a lot of work to do in the next, and that is what we're focused on. And I think Oregonians don't actually care about the Palisade Treaty. They care about, are we fixing the problems that our state faces? That is the only thing that matters right now, is in 35 days, can we make progress on those big issues? And so that's where we're focused right now. And, I know we've said it multiple times, we tried to take a no surprises approach with Leader Helfrich and the Republican caucus, and there are many conversations about how this could work and what is the best way to set us up for success in the 2020 session, knowing that we have big things like the transportation package that will be working. So that's the thing that I mainly wanted to say is we're all focused on trying to deliver on the really big, really challenging issues that we're taking up this.
I respect that. I just think who sits in that office also has a very big role in the things you're talking about. Are you saying you would oppose a speaker vote at the end of session?
Get my answer. I think I've answered that question. Yes. Speaker Rayfield is our speaker right now.
Love how you smirk when you answer that.
It's like you foreshadowed what the answer was going to be.
Let's squeeze one in and then we'll go. Are there any issues, controversial issues that you don't want to touch this session? Bills aren't going to bring to the floor, or issues that you don't want your comments?
I think what we're trying to do is, and I think you've heard both leaders talk about this, is stay focused on the big issues. That is what communities expect us to work on. Those are the top issues: housing and homelessness, behavioral health, and then there are budget adjustments that need to be made, that need to be funded. Daycare, right? Making sure that we are investing down the road. Those are the top priorities. Everything else, we are taking a no surprises approach. I think the Leader Helfrich is tired of meeting with me. Like he's absolutely sick of it. But we talk about things, and there are times, that there are going to be difficult conversations in the session. We're going to have a member, maybe in the Republican Party, maybe in the Democratic Party, that wants to have a conversation about something, and we will talk about that. And how do we manage those conversations to make sure that this is a healthy ecosystem? Because at the end, I think Leader Fahey said this the best, is like the only focus for us is that when we get to the end of this session, we've made meaningful progress on those issues. And that is what's driving us in this component. And there are a lot of issues, and we always forget this as legislators. We are going back in this building, whether you like it or not. There have been many years where my bills have not passed, and the sky has not fallen, and we've come back and passed them in another session, right? Years that I work on that range with ages, been doing that my whole life, right? Or, so we'll be back to be able to tackle some of those bigger issues later on.
The speaker said it very well. It's like, no surprises. We have an agenda in front of us that we need to focus on. If members bring up stuff that we may not agree with, we'll deal with it at that time and figure a path forward with that. But it's the no surprises approach that makes going to be successful for the system or the session, because if the system breaks down and we don't produce for Oregonians, that's a problem.
I think Dick, Lauren, Ben, and Claire.
When I grow up, I want to be like Dirk and Lauren, so I have a couple of questions. The first is, there's been the discussion about education formula, et cetera. It's people thinking schools need either more money or whether it's distributed differently. How much of that will happen during this session, if anything? And the second question that I always keep asking about is, how will the building reconstruction affect the dynamics of this session?
I'll take the building one. there's a lot of noise in the chamber with everybody talking all the time, and then we have the construction going on, so we can't each other talk. You know, it's the construction part of it. It was challenging last session because they had to have a certain time frame break for us, and so they weren't down there with the jackhammers. I think they've moved past that now, so it's not going to be as noisy, but the chamber is dismantled to a point. It's not affecting part of the session itself. There are some members that have hearing impairments, and so that could be the acoustic sounds in there and how that works. That can be a problem, so we have to figure out that solution to members to be able to hear. I'm kind of one of them. It's hard to hear on that.
There's always obstacles. We had obstacles when it came to last session, and you just have to work over it. And that is that there's a component of you always have your plan A, and you likely wind up plan C or B as you wind through the session. So being nimble and flexible as people in leadership, but then also as just individual members is very important. And sometimes that can mean moving. That's whatever it takes to actually get they need to be here in terms of the chamber. And then also I think we have to think about how does the public process and making sure that they have a space. I mean, you'd be surprised sitting in this office, some of the things that you did with, it'd be like, hey, we don't have Coke racks. At the beginning of the last long session, that was something that we were trying to figure out. It's also challenging for people who work in the building and having a space to work. Yourselves are included in that conversation, right? That changes the way you work. It changes the way people are trying to advocate work. And so we're always trying to balance that as best we can, but know that we have limited resources. The good news is that next year, we will be back in a really good spot. And I'm really excited to see what Apple's going to be next year. And then the question to education, with respect to kind of the conversation and some of those components. Having served in this role, it is this perennial conversation of is the CSL, what is the right number? Is that formula correct? Do we have the weight set appropriately? I think the governor's task force is the perfect way to set up that conversation for 25. There's a couple of legislators who have some thoughts on how do you calculate CSL. Those bills are in file and are going to be a part of the conversation. The question is, do we need to have more up in getting that conversation right to 25, or do we feel, and I haven't seen the final proposals, do we feel as though that those conversations are right for the short session? In a perfect world, they would be, right? I also do not want to undercut the governor's work in bringing stakeholders together to be ready for 25. So it's going to be a balance of legislative interest plus having partnership and conversations with it.
And I'll just add on the education funding, the formula distribution. So there's the overall amount of funding that we allocate and we budget for, and then there's the formula that says, how do we distribute that to each district? And we have a certain amount of funding for students who are living in poverty, students who are housed, language learner. There's been some conversation about whether we should reassess those weightings and that. And I think that's a very important conversation to have. And when you change the formula, you change how much, what the budgets for each of the districts are. You have to do that very carefully. You can't have a situation where a district is getting less funding than they otherwise, where their budget is being. And so those changes to the formula, I think our formula should accurately reflect the true cost of educating each student. And when you transition to a new formula, you have to do it very thoughtfully. So whether we can do that in a 35-day session in the middle of our 2-year biennium budget cycle, for me, I think I agree with the speaker that task force and the conversation this year, we can have that conversation when we're setting budget for the 25-27 next year.
I actually just have one very simple question. Representative Fahey, could you follow up on that revolving loan program? I remember something like that, similar, passing previous sessions, and then I kind of never heard about it. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about if that worked last time. It must have if you're proposing it again this session, how it works, and if it's financial, that what it is.
Yeah, there was a great overview in the House Housing and Homeless Legislative. And the idea is that you have a revolving loan fund that could be paid back with the property tax. And, as I said in my opening, we've had a lot of focus, and rightly so, on making sure enough affordable housing being developed, low-income or tax credits and other investments. And I think, it's very clear that we need to be building more housing for firefighters and middle-class Oregonians as well. And so this is taking a model. It's been worked by Representative Pam Marsh. If you're curious about the details, definitely that short presentation and legislative details.
How are you envisioning working to build that would?
And what we have tried to do, because the work doesn't start just in session, right? If you are starting working together in session, so we have had conversations in the interim, regular conversations we've had where it would be all of us getting together with the governor and kind of keeping in tune there. But then importantly, we are a different branch of government and the legislative leadership needs to get together and have conversations. So and that is in the leadership conversation. And then there is how do set a culture in the committee level cooperation and working together. And that's kind of what we talked a little bit about who's at the table, who feels heard at the table, and who feels engaged in the table. So that is part of what we've tried to do with the committee coming together, tried to do that in the housing space. Do you get it right absolutely every single time? No. You have to course correct throughout that period. Being able to have that conversation internally where the leader will come to me and say, hey, my folks, maybe they don't feel heard in this conversation. And then it's my responsibility in this leadership role to facilitate that, provide that feedback into that group to then lead that in a bipartisan way. Now, does that mean that everything we can work to do is exactly what Lee Helfrich wants? And the answer to that is yes. We always do. And that, that's the magic to this process. No. The truth is we're going to try and find ways where we can incorporate the valuable input into this conversation that people provide, because we have to remember there are each party has a different lens, a different area of the state that they represent, a different community, and it's something to have all of those voices there at the table. And so I'm being respectful on that. So that is the open conversation. Bring ideas forward. You will see us engage in the, and like I think Jeff has and I think some in the Republic, they repealed 110, right? Does that mean that that is where they, where they think they'll wind up? Probably not. You'd have to ask them, right? And so we're trying to find that space together. But again, we want to focus on what we believe is the right policy, not necessarily, and there's going to be compromise in that, but the goal should be ultimately, how do you get people the right supports and services that they need at the right times, as well as giving law enforcement the right tools. So it's kind of a long and windy here. I apologize. Still am an attorney. Thank you.
Okay. So the speaker identified it. Yes, we're going to have bipartisan issues, but we're also going to have issues that we're going to disagree on. And we had a proposal put forward 110, and it wasn't a full repeal, but it was fixed and make certain possession crimes back or recriminalize an accountability through the system to have an A misdemeanor instead of a C misdemeanor. We can get into the details on that later, but there are differences in the two plans. There have been differences where we haven't actually felt that our voice was heard. I went to the speaker, hey, we don't feel like we're being heard. And it's not just being heard, it's actually implementing the idea. It's not just, oh yeah, I heard you and then move on. Actually, all right, where's the rubber going to meet the road? How are we going to, there are some certain things that are just non-starters for us, and we have to be able to hold people accountable in the system and get the tools to law enforcement. But also, we have to get the resources to the people that need it the most, and who's able to identify that better, we believe, is going to the county level services that they need. Drug courts, all these things that have been underfunded for years, but that would probably be the one that you will see us having more conversations over. And it may get heated, and it's heated, it's louder voices. It's not disrespectful or anything like that. But here's my point. Here's your point. We're gonna work through that. Senator Lieber came to my office last week during legislation. Her and I had a very interesting conversation about it. speaker and I have conversations walking through the office. What are you doing on the second floor? I'm gonna go talk to somebody about this. Then we have a sidebar conversation. What do you think about this idea for accountability? Using the model of DUI diversion, same as a misdemeanor, but it's a diversion program. You already have a system in place ready to do that. So those are the conversations we have, and those are what are going to cause some people to be uncomfortable, get outside of their comfort zone to actually want to do something that's right.
I want to point out, like, this is such a unique conversation, and like the level of emotion that people have, whether it's because you have a family member or a friend, or there is you personally experience addiction in your life. It's like when I talk to Leader Fahey or anyone, there's a level of emotion that people describe. And there's a lot at stake in that conversation, and there's feelings, and there are difference, and there are genuine differences of opinions on how to tackle this issue. And that is the one thing that I've really appreciated over the last 6 months is people are really working hard to try and find the right solutions. We have differences, but I know for a fact that the way that Leader Helfrich and his caucus and folks are pushing it is to help human. And it is it's a refreshing conversation to be a part of in this legislative phase. It is a difficult conversation.
There's one more.
So, be a question for all of you. Look at the addiction crisis and what you've done so far. What's the biggest one single thing that you feel need to refine your?
I'll take a first shot at that. Police officer for 25 and a half years in the city. I see the lived experiences. I'm part of that. You get the help. But I think the $1 million question is how do you motivate people to get the help? Can you win that treatment? Being addicted to drugs is a cycle of addiction. You keep hearing about that, but you walk down the streets of the city of Bowling, Salem, wherever you're at, you will see that. And it's just not homelessness. It's people, their mind has changed because of the chemicals that they put into their body. And that is the biggest question is how do we get to the how do we get into the services, get the help? That's the $1 million question. And is it forced treatment? Is it persuasive treatment? What does that look like? And I think that's the question we all have to figure out at the end of the day, what's going to be the best.
I think from my perspective, we haven't started the session yet, so we haven't started the process. Public testimony, public input on the package. We've heard, the committee has worked for many months and has heard from experts and other addiction and law enforcement and perspectives, but the public input is, I'm sure we're all getting emails or phone calls from our constituents about the proposal, and I'm really interested to engage in those conversations. I had that email just that we drafted a response to this week from a constituent who's a Democrat who says this proposal isn't tough enough. Okay, let's engage on that. What would you like to see? Why do you want it to be a class A misdemeanor on par with things like strangulation and stalking? What level of misdemeanor would you like to see? So I think that, for me, that's the piece that hasn't been starting to happen now that we've rolled out the package and the starting to contact usually as legislators, but that conversation also needs to happen in public.
Public input's incredibly important. There also needs to be implementation and functionality for whatever we choose to do. I think that is one of the things that you hear widely. It doesn't matter if you're law enforcement, whether you're to a family with son or daughter struggling with addiction. We are not going to pass a bill on a 35-day session that on day 36, all of a sudden there's a magical set of treatment resources available to folks. We have to do it. That's going to take some time, and I think we have some strategies to get residential treatment online now. But that implementation component, setting expectations, is critical. One thing that I would also say is, like, again, and I get back and the addiction crisis takes up a lot of opportunity in the room. Housing and homelessness is very big to this issue, and it's very important as well. We need to be talking about both in this conversation, and then we also have to look in this state and investing in our future. We've had tremendous job reports. Our economy is doing well. At the same time, we just saw some reports, that crime is actually going down and making progress. We need to do a heck of a lot more. I think we should, and we're obligated to do it. On the end, the folks that we're trying to help, and that's what this session is for. For our leadership team, and Fahey leader as having the resources to ready to tackle.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
See my good side? She making fun of me? Oh, not at all.
Leader Helfrich has had to tell me not to make fun of him.